Recording in progress.
Welcome, everyone, and so nice to have you. And those of you who are joining us by watching the YouTube video, thank you for being part of this. I'm going to change to let's see here, the share the screen, and go to this. Let's see, how about this? And we'll make our bracha. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. So I checked the recordings we had from last year, and this appears to have been the week when I was on. I may have been at a kala of some kind, but I know that Lauren very kindly had run the program, and we do have the recordings. They should be on the YouTube site, but since I had not done it, I wanted to start at the beginning and share the screen the way I am, and maybe able to take a look at a Torah Tamima if we have time. It's pretty fundamental Torah Tamima that I think you might enjoy. So here we go. So, of course, we now begin this Parsha that describes Jacob's exile, which, according to Rebecca, was only going to be a short time, but of course she never gets to see him again after he leaves. We actually read in the Parsha, in Vayishlach, how Rebecca passes away. Actually, it said Rebecca's nurse passed away. It's a euphemism. And so Jacob is never going to see her again. And of course, this is all foreshadowing the whole theme, the major theme of exile and the importance of exile. And that, in a sense, of course, we're exiled from heaven, and we're exiled from the Garden of Eden. And what kinds of deep spiritual ideas are encapsulated in that? At any rate, we will start. Yes, if somebody would like to comment, that's fine.
Yeah, Rabbi,
Harlan, can you
going.
speak up, please? Go
Can you
ahead.
hear me?
I can hear you, yes. Sorry.
Okay. Going back to where uh, 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 Esau gave his birthright to Jacob. Okay. Well, then, if he gave his birthright to Jacob, then why would Jacob be punished? Because when why would they go through all that putting making him to be Isaac was blind, like he Jacob really had the birthright to be blessed. Why he shouldn't be punished? Because Esau swore the birthright away. When you swear something, God, makes that true. So he should never be punished, and he didn't have to go through all that. Jacob should have told his father Isaac, the birthright was sworn by Isaac to me, and he should have told his mother that too. I can't understand what all this is about.
Okay. So one thing to note is that the birthright is one thing and the blessing is a separate thing. They're not interconnected. That you have to compartmentalize them. Um, so that's so the reason why Jacob has to go through and learn these lessons is because that's part of what life is about, Harlan. If we were perfect, which would mean we would never need to be improved, because we were perfect. The implication is that if you have to be improved, then you must not have been perfect to begin with. At least that's our understanding of the word perfect. So the reason we're put into this world is to perfect ourselves. That's, as I said, God never would have created the world had it been perfect to begin with. So, and also there's a wonderful principle, Ma'aseh Avot Siman Labanim, which means that the actions of our patriarchs, of our ancestors, are a sign for us. They're a foreshadowing for us. And so, from a story point of view, this was a very important story to tell. And we know that every nation has its narrative, and this is the narrative of the Jewish people. And the other thing is that he nevertheless did trick his father. He did, and he did it surreptitiously to Esau. We also talked about the fact that the initial deal with the birthright was done under duress. It wasn't done in a really open kind of way, and these kinds of things are shaded. They're not black and white. And I think it's very important for us, and to me, it's actually part of the grandeur of why the narrative of the Torah and the Bible is so beautiful, because it's not black and white. Okay, and even though we consider Jacob to be a righteous person, nevertheless, he has flaws, and just like every human being has flaws, and that makes it realistic. And I'm going to have to ask whoever, you may want to check whether you're muted or not, because there's a lot of crackling and ambient sound going on. So thank you. It just stopped. So it's part of something to teach us, so importantly about these things. Okay, so yeah, so it's there are reasons why that happened. Okay, so here let's get started. So vaYetzei01, Jacob went out. So going out implies you're going out of something, and so he's leaving his home. He's leaving. Take into account all the connotations of what it is to be home, right? Familiarity, comfort, etc. And he had to leave. He had to leave it. And this is the beginning. This is the beginning of his odyssey, of the rest of his life, actually. Yatzei Yaakov mi Bersheva. Jacob left Bersheva. Vayelech Charan, and he went to Charan. So again, these sentences, if you start to try and deconstruct them, have some interesting suggestions to it. That he left and he went. Yes.
Esau was kidding when he said, "I'm going to kill my brother." Was he kidding?
Why would you think he was kidding?
I don't know. I just think you wouldn't kill your own brother. I mean, you
mean fratricide? So, Harlan, are you telling me that fratricide has never happened? Never happened.
I would never do that.
Well, I hope you wouldn't. But because you wouldn't doesn't mean there aren't others who might. And Esau was a violent person. He was a hunter. And I think the Torah wants us to understand that this is not an exaggeration. That he had every intent. And in fact, of course, we see later on in Vayishlach that Jacob is terribly worried that Esau still wants to kill him. When people allow their emotions to become overly powerful and start to live a dramatized life, that's what starts to happen. I mean, I think, I don't want to be drawn into what we're seeing happen today, with the way people are behaving and what appears to be irrational behavior. And they're very serious about it. So, vaYetzei01, right? Jacob left. Al yidei shebishvil sheraot benot Knaan be'enei Yitzchak aviv. And it says, on account that the daughters of Canaan were wicked in his father's eyes. Okay? This is not about Jacob now, you'll see. Halach Esav el Yishmael. Esau went to Yishmael. And so that we read, actually. So notice that we start this Parsha at verse 10. So the previous 9 verses are dealing with the fact, if you read the last little part of last week's Parsha, you remember that that Esau went and married one of the daughters of Ishmael. So the fact that there's this sort of lack of connection in a way. In other words, why are we reading about that? Because in fact this made more sense, right? In other words, after Rebecca goes and tells Isaac, that she needs Jacob to go to Charan, and after all, we're told that the initial wives that Esau took were a source of heartbreak and heartache to Isaac and to Rebekah. This should have followed, but it didn't. So Rashi's explaining to us what happened here. So he's explaining the context, right? And it says, now he makes a stylistic comment. Hifsik ha'inyan beparshato shel Yaakov. It interrupted, right? The Torah interrupted the issue of the story of Jacob. Uchtiv, okay, and that's why it's written, Vayar Esav ki varech, etc. Esau saw that Isaac blessed. And by the way, this is important, right? Without sort of going over stuff that is dealt with in last week's Parsha, we see that Isaac, without any trickery or anything, does give a blessing to Jacob, right? Right before. Umishe gamar chazar le'inyan harishon. Again, this is a stylistic comment that Rashi's making. It says, once he finished talking about what Esau went and did, he went back, chazar, he goes back to the first part story, because so it's saying basically that the story got interrupted because it was important to mention that particular detail regarding Esau and sort of finish that up. And of course, there's also, this just occurred to me now, that there's a parallel, and I think that's the real point that Rashi's making, is that just as Jacob is going off to marry a wife that will be suitable to Rebekah and Isaac, Esau went to get a wife that he thought would be suitable to, in other words, mishpacha, that would be suitable to Rebekah and Isaac. And in some ways, the fact that he made that decision, Esau made that decision, whereas Jacob is actually doing what his parents told him to do. And so there's that dynamic involved too. So I think I'm getting this from what Rashi is telling us now, that because there's this parallelism here going on, that's one of the reasons why the Torah decided to interrupt Jacob's story and tell us Esau's story here. Onwards. vaYetzei, he went out. And Rashi again is midayek on this. Lo hayat tzarich lichtov ela vayelech Yaakov Charana. The Torah, to inform us what it just informed us on the pshat level, only had to write vayelech Yaakov Charana. Jacob went to Charan. That's all it needed to tell us. V'lama hiskir yitziato. So why does it mention that he left Bersheva? Why does it say that? What's it trying to tell us? Because on the pshat level, it isn't adding a single thing. Of course he left Bersheva. How else was he going to get to Charan? But if the Torah wrote it down, there must be a reason. Ella, so what's the reason? Magid, this is a beautiful, beautiful passage. This is a beautiful Rashi. Magid, it tells us, Sheyitziat tzadik min hamakom, oseh roshem, that when a righteous person leaves a locale, it leaves an impression. It makes an impression. In what way? Shebizman shah tzaddik ba'ir, because as long as that tzaddik is in the city, hu hoda, hu ziva, hu hadara. Literally it means he is its distinctive, majestic quality, he is its splendor, he is its glory. We know institutions, places depend on the personalities. In my own experience, I have seen, and I think if you study history as well, you see just how much people's character, how much personality plays in how things develop. And because this is a tzaddik, okay, when that tzaddik leaves, yatsa misham, and when he leaves, pana hoda, its majesty turns away, pana ziva, its splendor turns away, pana hadara, its glory disappears as well. V'chein, and likewise we see similarly, vaYetzei min hamakom ha'amur ben Naomi verut, right? And he left, or she left the place that is referred to in Naomi verut and Ruth. So in the book of Ruth, we have a similar usage of the word vaYetzei. It doesn't just apply to men, it applies to women as well. It's got to do with one's righteousness and the impression that that leaves on a place.
So,
Yes, go
so
ahead.
yeah, just a question though. If this is a righteous person, and it leaves an impression, why would all that necessarily disappear? Right? Wouldn't the impression imply that some of the splendor and glory would still, remain? Yeah. Anyway,
Great question. And so, David, I think the answer is that it's like, I think when they existed, Eastern Airlines used to say, "We earn our wings every day."
yep.
It's an ongoing process. And you can't, I know, on the other side of it, you don't want to have the attitude of, "What have you done for me lately?" But for ourselves, we have to realize we can't rest on our laurels. And that's quite literally what we're talking about here. So, yeah, maybe historically, a city can look back on its past in that regard. But if it's to be ongoing and the energy's got, what's happened is the energy's left.
Mm,
That energy, that spiritual energy that gave it that distinction at the time.
got it.
So
Okay.
no, of
Yep.
course, and thank you, because I think you raised a very good point. Okay, because of your question. So, Vayelech Charana. This is exactly the point. This is the pshat, totally. Yatsa lalechet leCharan. He left to go to Charan. So I have to tell you, and maybe it's somewhere else, that Rashi is referring to a midrash that basically says that there was kfitzat haderech, and he may mention it later on, that there's a famous midrash that when Jacob left Bersheva, when he went to Charan, when you look at that in its most literal sense, it means he left Bersheva and he was in Charan. In other words, what we talk about in Hebrew as kfitzat haderech, which means as if, you go very swiftly, like time travel. Boom, you're there. Or else another way in which it's described is that the land folds itself up under you so that you can get there very, very quickly. And so we'll
How
Harlan.
far is Beersheba to Haran?
Well, I would say it's probably even by car, it's probably over a day away. Okay.
Well, how did he get all his food and water? It must have been a dangerous place to travel. He was in the land of Canaan, It's,
Okay, I think travel in general was a dangerous thing, but I'm sure they had places. I mean, as long as people were traveling, and people were traveling, they were taking merchandise and goods and trading and stuff. So, assumedly, he would stop by the cities where he could stop by and get get his food and be able to rest and stuff like that. The idea of lodgings, it's a very ancient concept of being able to stay at a place. The whole idea of the hospitality industry, let's call it that, right? So so given that vayifba makom vayalin sham. So there's also an interpretation that suggested that he made it to Charan and then decided he needed to go back. And Rashi may, in fact, discuss this. It's a fairly well-known midrash, that he felt that this was a place where his ancestors had worshipped, and he needed to do that and go back to that place. Excuse me. Vayifba bamakom. He reached the place, vayalin sham, and he spent the night there, kiva hashemesh, for the sun was setting. Vayikach me'avnei hamakom, he took from the stones of the place, vayasim me'ra'ashotav, and he placed them at his head. Vayishkav b'makom hahu, and he rested, or he lay down in that place.
What was that place? Was that Bethel?
Yes, eventually it would be, correct. Right, that's what he named it. Right. It was, remember, originally it was called Luz, and that is something the Torah is going to state itself explicitly. Vayifba b'makom, right? He reached the place. Lo hiskir hakatuv be'eze makom. So Rashi again is giving us some, I would say, an in-depth explanation of how traditional interpretation is made, right? So it says the scriptural text did not mention which place, doesn't say which place, Ella, so it has to be b'makom haniskar, because it says, let's take a look at, it says b'makom, the place. He reached the place. Well, that's using the definite article, and the definite article means something we've already referred to. We know what it's talking about. Otherwise, it should say vayifka b'makom, in a place. But he reached the place. So again, just being very careful about this. So, b'makom haniskar, right? So it must be a place that was mentioned already. B'makom acher, in another context. So somewhere else in the Torah, this quote place quote was mentioned. Hu har Hamoriah. That in fact would have been Mount Moriah. Shene'emar bo, and how do we know this? Vayar et hamakom merachok. When it talks about Abraham's journey and where he is about to, slaughter Isaac, it says about him, he saw the place from a distance. In other words, the place that God had told him to take Isaac. Vayifga, he reached. Kamo, and he gives an example of this because it's an interesting Hebrew word to use in this context. Kamo ufaga b'Yericho, and they reached Jericho, or he reached Jericho. Ufaga b'Dabeshet. It's the name of a place, right? He reached Dabeshet. So now he goes on to a very famous rabbinic interpretation. V'rabotenu pirshu, but our rabbis interpreted, and this is the Talmudic tractate Brachot Kaf Zayin, page 27 of Brachot, Lashon Tfilah. This is actually, this word paga has the connotation of prayer, specifically the Amidah. Kamo, as it says, Jeremiah 7, Ve'al tifga bi. Do not meet me. Do not, and in some ways it could mean, do not strike me. But it does mean, do not try to meet me. This is God speaking to the Jewish people and basically saying, your behavior is such, I don't want your sacrifices. And of course, so it was, again, referring to, and also just don't appeal to me. Don't pray to me. I don't want to hear your prayers. Not until you behave differently. V'lamadnu, and so we learn, shetiken tfilat arvit, that Jacob was the one who established the Ma'ariv prayer of the 3 daily prayers, right? Abraham the morning, Shacharit, Isaac Mincha, and Jacob Arvit. V'shina hakatuv, and Scripture changed the language, right? Altered the language. V'lo katav vayitpalel. So of course that's begging the question. So if it meant he should pray, that he was praying, why didn't it say it? Why does it use this word paga? L'lamecha. Here we go. So here's that statement that I told you Rashi's going to tell us. To teach you shekaftsa lo haaretz, that the land, right, had shortened the distance, right? His distance had been short. Kamo shemefurash b'perek gid hanasheh, as is explained in the Talmud, in the chapter Gid Hanasheh, that's in the tractate Chulin, page 91. and it talks about this. Okay, so essentially, he was going to get to Charan very, very quickly, but he decided he wanted to go back to this particular place. But let's just see exactly how Rashi explains it. Kiva Hashemesh, for the sun was setting. Hayalo lichtov vayavo Hashemesh vayalen sham. It should have written, if it had simply meant that he had to stop there because the sun was setting and it was getting dark, right? It should have written, the way it should have been written was, it should have said the sun was setting, and so he spent the night there. Kiva Hashemesh, for the sun set, right? Mashma, that implies shak'alo hachama pitom. In other words, that all of a sudden the sun set, it got dark, all of a sudden. That's what the connotation is. Shelo be'unata, it wasn't at the right time. Okay, I guess daylight savings time ended and no one knew about it. So it was setting early, very early. Kedesha alin sham, so that he would spend the night there. In other words, it's putting a level of causation suggesting that God purposely altered nature so that the sun set in an unusual time and very suddenly, so that he had no choice but to be there. So the implication being that it was a divine decree and divine will that he spend the night there.
But Abraham spent the night there too.
Well, we don't know about him spending the night at Har HaMoriah. We're not, unless it says Vayash came, and maybe it does. I mean, I'd have to go back and look and see, right? But it certainly, as far as I know, it wasn't a big point being made. I'd have to see. The point is that Abraham worshipped there, right? He was ready to, make the ultimate sacrifice there. Going on, and we just have a little more time. Vayasim merashotav, he placed at his head. Asa'an kemin marzev, he made these stones like a type of spout. Saviv lerosho, around his head. Sheyara mipnei chayot raot, because he was fearful of wild animals, wild beasts. And then it says, Hitchilu merivot zo et zo, each stone started to contend with the other stone. This is, of course, highly literary. Zot omeret Allah yaniach tzadik et rosho. The one said, "Oh, this tzaddik is going to put his head on me." Vezot omeret Allah yaniach, and the other one said, "No. I'm the one who this tzaddik has to rest his head on." Miyad as'an hakadosh baruch hu evan achat. And when God saw that each one of them was contending, but for the privilege, right, and the honor of having the head of a tzaddik rest on it, right? In other words, they wanted to serve a tzaddik. They all deeply desired to serve a tzaddik to the point that they were contending with each other. Vezehu she'nemar, and that's why it's written, Vayikach et ha'evan. Right? It says he took stones, but then it says he took the stone, asher sam merashotav. After he spends the night there, remember, he takes the stone on which he rested his head and makes an altar out of it. But it says the stone, and yet it started off with lots of stones. So again, I don't think we should get all upset, that this is not something scientifically likely, etc. I think it has more to do with the degree to which we should want to support righteousness. And that when we are all supporting righteousness together, it becomes a unifying act. I think we need to, I think it is helpful. I don't want to totally metaphorize the Bible script, but on the other hand, when we get to passages like this, what concerns me is we get bothered by the fact that it seems to challenge our credulity to such an extent, and then we tend to belittle it instead of trying to say, what is it really trying to tell us? What is it trying to accomplish? And then to try and struggle to see what it is really saying, which is one way of showing respect for the text. So we're going to stop here and, God willing, continue tomorrow. So I'm going to put the marking in here. Oops, sorry. I have to get the right thing. Okay. I will start right there tomorrow, and I'll pop in the bookmark. Okay. Oh, no, I'm going to actually, we still will be on the other page. So I'm going to stop the share and stop the recording and thank those who have joined us this morning. It's wonderful to have you with us.